All right, we are live. Now, let me see if everything is right. People, okay, should be fine. Check OBS. Let me admit one more person. Right. Bruno, you can make it full screen if you want, so we can start.
Okay.
That's great. Welcome all of you to this weekly seminar. And today we have Bruno from TU Berlin and Fraunhofer, and he's going to talk about interpretability as interpretability transferable across language models. And yeah, thank you. Bruno, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much also for the invitation. As you said, I'm a PhD student at Fraunhofer HHI and Technical University of Berlin. And I want to show you our paper, Atlas Alignment, Making Interpretability Transferable Across Language Models. So I'm firstly going to give you a quick motivation on why we would actually want alignment and interpretability, then show you our Atlas alignment method, and then present some experiments and results. So yeah, also if you have any questions, you can also directly interrupt me, or we just collect them in the end. And also this is a work in progress. I'm really interested also in your feedback and in the discussion in the end. So let me start with what we usually want from post-hoc interpretability. So typically there are two capabilities that we are mostly interested in. So we might want to understand components of our networks. So we might have some language model with some latent space that we want to understand, for example, the neurons in or the attention heads, and understand their role they play inside the network. We might also be interested in just understanding where or how a concept is encoded, so some human-aligned or semantic concept that we're interested in understanding. Like in this example, we have some neuron and it's somehow aligned to stories about deception. And this then ties into our second capability that we're usually interested in. So often we want to try to modify the model behavior in some predictable way. So we might want to steer generation, for example, of this deception concept, so that we have, for example, a language model that is less deceptive, or maybe some language model that has a less harmful output, or things like that. So we have this search and this steer capability. And the way this is often done is using, for example, sparse autoencoders, or generally some automated interpretability pipeline. So we start with our unknown latent space here on the left. We don't really know what each of those features encode. And usually they're also very polysemantic, so they might encode different concepts in a single unit that we as a human would typically decompose into multiple concepts. And using sparse autoencoders or other dictionary learning approaches, we could decompose these features into more monosemantic features, where then each hopefully corresponds to some concept that we can actually understand as human. Then in a second interpretability step, we could apply some automated labeling. So we might have some, we might collect some very activating samples for each of the features in our sparse autoencoder, build like a small data set that describes this feature, and hand it to some external language model to find a pattern in it. So for example, here we again might have some samples that are about deception or deceiving, hiding your intentions, and then you might pass this to some language model, and it might give you this deception concept, which you could then use to describe your latent space. And thirdly, what I think is also quite important is actually then validating if your natural language description matches what you think, if your natural language description matches what the feature actually does. So in a recent paper or in a previous paper of ours, we also created an automated framework for evaluating these kinds of alignments. And if you do all this, then you get some interpretable latent space where you can do also the search operation or the steering operation, just on the base of human understandable concepts. But the problem with this is that we have to repeat this per model or even per latent space. So for every layer of our network that we want to understand here, we have to repeat this whole process, which is quite costly. And also, since we get a lot of new models basically every week, this is a bit hard to scale. And especially if we look at the cost of interpretability, so sparse autoencoder training is, of course, very expensive. Usually you have like 500 million to many billion of tokens that you need to do inference or training on. Also, the automated labeling steps are quite expensive. This, of course, varies very much by what kind of labeling approach you actually use. But typically, it's also multiple millions to billions of tokens that you need for the whole layer, and then a couple of hundreds or thousands of tokens per feature also for the inference on this explainer language model that sort of tries to find a pattern for every neuron. And similarly, for the validation, this also varies quite a bit, but usually you have some large corpus that you want to get activations on to get maximally activating samples, for example, and then also need a couple of thousands of tokens per feature for this evaluation language model. So this imposes a transparency tax. Basically, every new model that we try to explain has to repeat the same cost. And this led us to the question if we can pay this cost only once, and then maybe reuse our knowledge of the latent spaces to do interpretability. And the question why this even might work can be answered by these two hypotheses. So first of all, the linear representation hypothesis, which says that concepts are encoded as direction in feature space. So we can do linear operations on these directions and basically, for example, change the output of the language model with respect to that concept, or also just use it as detection mechanism for the concept inside the language models. And secondly, the Platonic representation hypothesis, which basically says that given large enough data sets that are like also a representation of some reality, models will converge on similar internal representation of concepts. And they show this also for different modalities, so models trained on vision or on language, and show that there are some similar structures that emerge. But it's also, of course, important to say that this will not hold generally. And if you take two random models, there's, of course, not a perfect overlap of concepts. But also, it doesn't need to be perfect, at least in our framework. We just need enough shared structure so that we can find some relation between models. Okay. So given this, we can then move on to our framework. Basically, the idea here is that we have some concept atlas here on the right. So this is our known latent space. Usually it's also just some language model with maybe a sparse autoencoder here that decomposes the latent space into our human understandable and interpretable concepts. And we can do this validation on this and then use this basically as our reference space. And on the left, we have our subject model latent space. So this is just basically any model that we want to understand. So we have also here, for example, some neurons, and we don't really know what they encode yet. But what we try to do then is find some mapping from our concept atlas into the subject model. And we do this via a translation matrix. So this is just a matrix we try to learn, where every row of the matrix is one feature of the subject model and describes this neuron in terms of all the features of our concept atlas. So we get this nice decomposition where we can then look at one of our neurons that we previously don't understand and just see, okay, it is a linear combination of these maybe 3 features here. And the way we align this is also pretty simple. So we just firstly collect shared activations, usually on some retraining kind of data set. So something you might also use for training your sparse autoencoder, just something that's broad enough to contain many different sequences. This also, of course, doesn't need to be a concept labeled or something. This is just basically a big corpus of data. Then we generate our activations. We do a max pooling operation over the sequence length. And we need to do this because since we're aligning different models, they also might have different tokenizers. So we need some sort of averaging over the sequence length that we get a single vector per sample. We also tried mean pooling here, but empirically found that max pooling works quite well. But yeah, this is also something one could change if one is interested. And finally, in the last step, we just learn this translation matrix. So we have our 2 matrices of activations from the subject model space and the concept atlas space. And we just create a matrix where every row represents a subject feature in terms of the concept atlas. And we tried various different alignment methods here. So naively, we thought that linear regression might work best because we can just minimize the sum of the squared error, basically. But we found that this really doesn't work that well. And this orthogonal process method here seems to work really best. So this is just a down projection and rotation or reflection of the feature space. And somehow you will see also in all of our experiments that this performs by far the best. But we also tried other methods like correlation or covariance or semantic lens, basically some alignment method that tries to use sort of prototypes for each feature. So once we have this alignment matrix, we can make use of it for search and steering. So the way this works is that we have our concept atlas and we can select concepts from it. So we might be interested again in finding something out about secrets and deception in our model. So we can build a concept query that contains all the concept atlas features that are related to our concept. So here, this is from Gamma Scope 16K with labels from the FADE paper. And yeah, so we have like these 4 concepts. We can build a vector of the dimensionality of the concept atlas and only set those couple of features to 1 and the rest to 0. We could also do some weighting. So if we think, for example, that sequence at concealment is the most important feature here, we can push this higher. Or we could also select concepts by ingesting a data set or some concept examples into our concept atlas and then average over them to get this concept vector. Once we have this, we can simply take the cosine similarity with our concept vector, our concept query, and our translation matrix, so that we basically for every row measure the alignment to this vector. And this gives us a vector in the dimensionality of the subject model. And what we can do then is, first of all, search for maybe features that encode this concept very strongly. So since it's just a vector listing the cosine similarity to our concept vector, we can just, for example, look at the strongest or the features that have the strongest cosine similarity to it and check them out in detail. So then we might find some feature that, for example, has up here, this, I think, some llama 3.18b feature that has maximally activating samples that are very related to this deception and truth-telling. We can also use this concept vector then for steering the subject model. So we just inject it basically during generation or a scaled multiple of it. And then if the model was, for example, here previously talking about a small village nestled in the countryside, we add this multiple to this, to the, for example, residual stream, and then it will talk about some beautiful forest with a secret. So this is basically the method of atlas alignment. And now I will go over our experiments and show you some of the results. And there are basically 4 different questions that we want to answer. First of all, we're interested in the general translation quality. So this is basically asking, is there actually any kind of semantics that we can transfer reliably? Secondly, more use case oriented, we are interested in measuring the retrieval quality. So basically, can we identify concept features in a subject model using our alignment method? And thirdly, we're interested in evaluating steering. So if we just choose these couple of concept features from our concept atlas, can we actually reliably steer the subject models in the direction of producing more of this concept? And finally, we want to ask about data efficiency. So how much data do we actually need to create a solid alignment? And in all our experiments, we use the uncopyrighted data set. So this is also just some pre-training data set that you might use for training your sparse autoencoder or something. We draw shorter sequences out of these long sequences. So we basically modify them a bit and then draw 500,000 samples for the train and for the test set. So in total have 15 million tokens each. And we align then on this train set, and our evaluations are all on this held out test set. As Atlas, we use the GammaScope 16K sparse autoencoder. In the paper, we also use the 65K variant. But here I'm just going to show some 16K results, and we use feature descriptions from the FADE paper. And we use a variety of subject models. So mostly this llama 3.18b instruct version at different layers, some minstrel model, Quen 2.5 at different sizes, as well as GPT-2, just to give like a really broad overview of how we can actually align to different models using the same atlas. Okay, so first we look at the translation quality. Here the question is, can we actually transfer meaningful semantics using this alignment? And the way we do this is that we compare sample rankings before and after translation. So this is basically a quick sanity check. Does it actually preserve semantic structure? So it works the following way. We take one atlas feature from our concept atlas. So we might, for example, again, take the secrets feature and look at all the samples that highly activated. And then we have basically this ranking on our test set. Then we translate the single atlas feature into the subject model latent space and check whether, if we again rank all samples based on the projection to this direction, if the samples rank similarly. So basically, we treat this set of samples as a concept reference set, and we want to measure if this set of samples also transfers reliably. And we measure this using the AUROG. So this is basically just for getting broad separation between concept and non-concept samples. So basically the probability that a random concept sample is above a non-concept sample. And more importantly, we measure the average precision, which basically asks, do the most relevant concept samples also stay at the top after translation? And so this is a very uninviting table, but basically what I just wanted to show here is that the AUROG is pretty high for all of the different methods we test. But orthogonal procrustes here, as I already said, performs the best. But more interestingly, if we look at the average precision, there's a quite big difference between orthogonal procrustes and all the other methods. So basically, we have almost twice as high of an average precision value between orthogonal procrustes and all the other methods. So the takeaway is, okay, we can transfer broad semantic signal basically with any method, but the orthogonal procrustes method gives us the best top-ranked concept signal, basically. Okay, so secondly, we're interested in semantic retrieval. So here we ask, how well can we actually identify concept features in an unknown latent space? And for this, we need some ground truth model. So we need to know actually what kind of concepts are present in a subject model so that we can measure how well we can retrieve them. And for this, we take a pre-labeled subject model. So this is the Llama 3.18b layer 19 MLP, which transluce labeled. We then validate that the natural language descriptions actually fit what the feature does using fate. And for those where this alignment is good, we then create a synthetic data set based on this natural language description. So basically, we create a data set that targets exactly the concept that the neuron encodes. Then we can create a concept query by embedding this data set in our concept atlas. So then we, for example, just average over the activations on this synthetic data set. We translate it back into the subject model space, and then we rank the subject model features based on the cosine similarity. And ideally, what we want is, of course, that our concept query for example, this flowers features is ranked the highest across all features. Then we know that we can basically retrieve our feature well. So we measure this using the mean reciprocal rank. It's basically it's like the inverse rank. So if it's 1, then we retrieve our correct feature. So this has then the highest cosine similarity. And if it's close to 0, then we pick it maybe last or like at a random score. And secondly, we use the mean predicted probability, which is like a softmax over the cosine similarity. So there we can measure the distribution or the certainty of the respective method. And so these are results, as I said, for the Llama IT layer 19 MLP layer and the GammaScope 16K concept atlas. And you can see that orthogonal procrustes really performs quite well. So the score is 0.97 on the mean reciprocal rank, which basically means that almost every time we pick the correct feature with the highest cosine similarity, and also when we look at the mean predicted probability, almost all of this probability mass is concentrated on the correct feature. Semantic lens also performs quite well here in the ranking-based metric, but if we look at the predicted probability, we see that it scores much worse. So this basically means that semantic lens has probably a lot of similar feature encodings, even though we can also use it to retrieve the correct features quite well. And the other methods are pretty far behind. So basically this tells us, okay, with orthogonal processes, we can actually do quite well, do feature search quite well, but the other methods are maybe not so great. So next, we want to look at steering effectiveness. So basically, we ask if we just use our concept atlas features, can we reliably steer the model? And for that, we simply, so it's quite easy experiment setup. We simply prompt the model, get an unsteered generation with just greedy decoding. Then we select some concept from our concept atlas. We build a concept query and again embed it in the subject model using this cosine similarity, and steer the generation with multiple steering values, and send basically the unsteered generation as well as the steered generations to some LLM judge and see whether we can actually, if our steering improved the occurrence of the concept in our generations. And this is then rated by the faithfulness score. So this is the increase from the baseline rate of our concept appearance, basically. And if we look at some results, we can see that orthogonal processes again steers quite reliably. So here, for example, in GPT-2, you see that we get a faithfulness increase of around 20%. So we're able to steer about 20% of additional sequences towards our different concepts. If we look at Llama layer 12, there's sort of an outlier. So here actually cross-correlation and covariance are better than orthogonal processes. We're not really sure why this happens, but generally we can also see that orthogonal processes is really strong across all different models, and especially if we steer in multiple layers combined. So this is just here, all these layers combined, then orthogonal processes really performs quite well here. Next, we are also interested in the cost of transferring concepts. So, of course, we know that if we create steering vectors directly inside our models, they will probably perform better since we just have access to the actual activations. But we're interested in how well we can actually translate also concept and steer with this. So what we do is just compare native and translated supervised steering vectors. We create data sets of certain concepts. We create difference of means steering vectors both inside the native model. So this is again Llama 3.18b instruct, as well as inside our concept atlas, and then translate these to the Llama model again. And you can see here on the blue line the normalized native performance. So in layer 3, we get quite a low steering effectiveness. Here, layer 19 is quite decent, and it drops off a bit. And then first looking at orthogonal clusters, we can see that in layer 3, we are actually steering better with our translated steering vector than with the native steering vector. I think this is mostly due to steering vectors also not being like a causal guarantee that you can steer in the correct direction. Also, the value is quite low here, so probably it's just not so linearly encoded, the concept we were steering for here. But generally, you can see that there's like a gap of maybe 25% in layer 12 and layer 19, and this then this gap then gets smaller over the later layers, and on average we trail this native steering capability of by 5.6 percentage points, which is, I think, not bad, especially compared to all the other translation methods that we try here. So basically, cross-correlation is somewhat able to steer, but it's very bad compared to orthogonal procrustes. Okay, and finally, we want to look at data efficiency. So how much data we actually need for an alignment. In our previous experiments, we always used this 500,000 sequences training data set to create the alignment. And in this experiment, we simply subsample from this data set and train on these smaller subsets, and then measure both the translation quality, again, as AUROC, and the semantic retrieval as mean reciprocal rank. And if we look at the orthogonal procrustes again first, so this blue line with the circles, you can see that already after 50,000 samples, we get quite a decent alignment. So this is, you can see that the rate of improvement tapers off. So this is about 1.5 million tokens to get a decent alignment score. You can also see that covariance and cross-correlation basically don't improve anymore after 10,000 samples and stay fairly constant. Semantic length improves a bit. And linear regression follows this really strange path where it improves a lot up until 10,000 and then tapers off here in the semantic retrieval case and a bit later in the translation quality case. So we are not really sure why this happens. Might be because of some multicollinearity, or yeah, we're not really sure. But you can definitely see that orthogonal procrustes performs quite robustly here. Okay, so to close, the main takeaway is that we can actually transfer interpretability across models and latent spaces. So the interpretability infrastructure that we already have, like trained sparse autoencoders or labeled sparse autoencoders, becomes reusable. And we can enable search and steer capabilities on other latent spaces simply by learning this cheap alignment rather than retraining them. Empirically, we also see that orthogonal procrustes gives us the most robust transfer. We see that a lot of the methods can recover some semantic signal, but orthogonal procrustes is really the most consistent one, especially for retrieval and steering. And of course, the very important caveat of this whole approach is that we need some shared latent space structure, and our concepts that we can transfer actually need to be encoded in some linear way. Otherwise, we will simply not be able to recover them. We have this metric for measuring how well it works using this translation quality and especially the average precision metric. But it is, of course, the real boundary of this approach. But I think it's still a useful approach as it gives us a quick interface basically to interact with new models. And looking forward, I think interesting would also be to explore new parts of the transformer architecture. So right now we've only looked at MLP layers as well as residual stream. But it would be really interesting to also try to align to attention heads. What is missing for us here at the moment is some high quality concept atlas that has concepts related to, basically the actions an attention head or the attention part will perform. And also interesting might be to try cross-modal transfer, but here, of course, we have the even stronger problems of maybe little shared linear geometry. And finally, something that we've not looked into yet, but what would be really interesting is that we can actually compare different concepts encodings across models. So we have all these translation matrices that align from some latent space to the same concept atlas. So we could just use them to compare how, for example, different models encode concepts in maybe single neurons or generally in directions. So yeah, that's basically already it. And thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer some questions also.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the audience?
Very cool work. Do you mind going to the slides that had like the method? Where's the translation? I think it's slide the one after.
This one, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So here, so the one that, how do you get the translation metrics? I think maybe the one after or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes. So training this translation metrics, you just take the embeddings from the new model, like for Mistral versus Llama, and then you just create a translation metrics per model, right? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, exactly. And
okay.
the main. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So the main point is that we only need to generate these couple of activations for the new model. We can also just cache, of course, the activation of our concept atlas, and so it's a lot less activations basically than we need to generate, for example, for some sparse autoencoder. But of course, we need to do inference on our subject model.
Okay, and basically you don't need a lot of data to create this translation metrics, and that was the last experiment you showed, which is like with a few thousand examples, you can get a pretty good translation metrics.
Yeah, exactly. So for the orthogonal procrustes method, at least.
And do some models perform better than other? For example, does Llama differ from Mistral? Do you find any differences in the models itself? Because most of the experiments you did was on Llama, the results you showed was on Llama. Is there a very big difference between? So I'm not sure the Sparse autoencoder, the initial one was trained on which one, but maybe it was trained on Llama. So if you put it on Mistral, it might be different. Did you look is there differences across models?
Yeah, definitely. So the sparse autoencoder is trained on the gamma 2B model. So this is not Llama. I'm not sure why we did most experiments on this Llama instruct, but I think mostly because we had also these labeled layers from translose here. But if you look at this translation quality experiment, you can also see differences, especially in this average precision. So, for example, for GPT-2, we have a much lower average precision value than, for example, this Mistral model. And this is, of course, also because this GPT-2 model is so much smaller, or probably the structures are just less similar to the gamma 2B model than to this Mistral model. And we also see this in our steering experiments. So there we also perform it on multiple different models. And if I go to this slide, here you can also see that probably the alignment is simply not as great because we are much less able to steer the model in the direction that we want than with the different Llama layers, for example.
Thank you so much for the clarification.
Any other question? Otherwise, I can jump in. Can you go back to slide, I think 7?
This one?
Yeah. So I'm here. I was just wondering. In this methodology, you're not changing the parameters in the first step when you feed X to these two models. You're not fine tuning the models, or like you're not training a sparse autoencoders in the first in the top path here. This is not okay.
This is just
it's just like a model, and you take a latent representation of this model as is, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we just cache activations basically here in this step.
And so this was the first question. The second question was in the path below, are the units in the first step monosemantic or not? To what extent did you measure that? So.
Yeah, so I mean, we use this gamma scope 16K autoencoder. So I guess the hope or the idea is that they are pretty monosemantic. And this is also something we try to validate with our fate methodology. So basically, yeah, our concept atlas should have monosemantic features. We don't measure this in this paper directly. We have, like in our previous paper, we do some experiments also on this same sparse autoencoder, validating each of the features. But generally, yeah, the idea is that you have your interpretable monosemantic latent space here.
I see.
Yeah, can I ask something about this slide? So here, the one that is on the bottom is basically the one that you trained the SAE with, and the other one is like the new model we want to query, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the max pooling is over the whole sentence. Like you take the embeddings of the whole sentence and you the activations of the whole sentence and you max pool.
Yeah, so over the sequence length, basically, so that we can have also different tokenizers and still align, because otherwise, I mean, ideally we would like to have an alignment of each token to the corresponding token in the other model, but if we have different tokenizers, this is much more difficult. Sorry, it's a bit loud here, but this is why we need this pooling operation here.
This is very cool that this actually works. I wouldn't have thought it would work across models.
Yeah, I was also pretty surprised, I have to say. Especially, I think the retrieval works really well. So yeah, this is quite nice.
A few more questions, if please, if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I keep going. The first one is if you have a very large concept set in Atlas, there might be like, let's say that you have concepts that depend or can be written as a function of other concepts, like because they are correlated, maybe. So in a way, you could find, so there might be multiple ways of projecting your embedding space into the Atlas concept space. And as the number of concepts grows, this, like, is there like a reference set, or like a normalized basis of concepts that you can project into, and then like rewrite the other concepts as a function of these concepts? The reason I'm asking is that, again, otherwise you might have different models projecting different areas that like they look like different, like the concepts activated may look different, but they're actually the same because they are just linearly dependent in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't have an answer, I think, directly to this right now, but I think this is also why, for example, linear regression might fail, because it just can't distinguish between concepts that might be even concepts that are separable in the concept atlas, but that are maybe the same in the subject model. So I think this might be the problem here. And I think this orthogonal procrustes approach is a bit more robust here because it just rotates or reflects space. So I think this
in a way it seems it restricts the possible projections that you can do on atlas. Then this
exactly.
makes, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing is just like a note. Since you mentioned the like cross-model, you wanted to test cross-model applications. This reminded me of a paper called about relative representations. There is actually, I think, a line of research about this, where they show that if you have like the latent space of large enough models trained on a large enough data set, could be of models that are trained on different modalities. Like this latent space, the latent spaces of different models can be matched by a simple linear mapping. So it might be just a roto translation that goes from one latent space of a model trained on one modality to the latent space of another model in another modality. So here you're not training anything. I think they have to train something in that case, but just a linear probe or something like this. And these might be useful if you're thinking about cross-model application.
Yeah, cool. Do you know the name of the paper? Yeah. I think I've also seen some.
Like the paper that I know is called Relative Representations Enable Zero-Shot Latent Space Communication.
Okay, yeah, cool. We'll check that out also.
I think a clear paper 2023. Okay.
Yeah, I think there have been several works that also show that linear alignment between like vision and language can work. I think the question for us is probably, does it work well enough to actually give us like meaningful interpretability?
Sure.
So that would be something I would be interested in checking out. But yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay. Otherwise, oh yes, we do.
No, just a quick question, like a following up on Pietro's one. What is the size of the number of concepts from the atlas? Like, what are the sizes that you play with, just to have a clue on why linear versus orthogonal, as you were thinking?
Yes. In our paper, we use this gamma scope 16K variant. So this is 16,000, hopefully monosemantic features. We also tried this 65K variant. So this is basically the same latent space, but decomposed into 65,000 features. But we do most of our iterations on the 16K variant. I think the semantic retrieval one, we also show the 65K variant for, and I think actually the scores are quite similar, although I'm not.
So you didn't find large differences between 65K or 16?
No, I think so. I would have to actually look it up again, but basically it was the same pattern that we see also, that basically orthogonal procrustes performs really well. Semantic lens works somewhat for this retrieval operation, and the other methods, especially linear regression, are basically at this random baseline level, so quite poor.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean specifically by semantic lens?
This is also like a representational alignment method where you basically you can represent a feature as a bunch of relevant samples, basically. So it's like a prototype, and then you can embed this or like use this as transferring the concept, basically.
I see. Okay. So you don't have a section in the paper or a clear understanding on why different methods perform differently. I mean, we have this kind of idea that if there is high redundancy, then one might perform better than the others. But did you find any patterns in addition to this, or it's just open research?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not super sure. I mean, we have these hypotheses, but we haven't proved them or anything. So this would be really interesting to see maybe for why orthogonal procrustes performs best, or if it's actually just if there's a better method also.
If there is a way to find kind of a theoretical optimal for this.
Yeah, that would be super cool.
Okay, thank you. Very good, thank you.
All right. Any other question? Okay. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for attending, and see you next week.
Yeah, thank you a lot.